All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're officially recording now. People can hear you. So, what we're going to do is talk briefly about poetry analysis. Okay? All right. So, the intent of this, ladies and gentlemen, is to give us a baseline understanding of how to read and interpret poetry without it being an overly complicated thing. Okay? This is not anything new. This method is not anything new. In fact, most of you probably have used it at some point or been introduced to it 7th to 8th grade. And if you haven't, you consider this an introduction. If you have, consider this a reintroduction. Okay? Poetry, like any art, is subjective. Okay? It all depends on who's reading it, how they feel that day, whatever the case may be. Now, there are some poems that you read, like, okay, this is what that author is talking about, what that poet is talking about. For most poems, really depends on the person that's reading. However, from an academic standpoint, analysis is analysis. And in this room, as you know, the only wrong answer is one you cannot justify. So what we're going to talk about is a way for you to be able to justify any view you have on any piece of poetry that you read. Yes?
What if you know like you are starting to answer and you can picture you know what I'm talking about?
Allow me to give you an example as a retort. You want to go to Dallas for the weekend with your friends without parental guidance. You know that you're going to be safe and everything's going to be okay, right? You already know this. You know the area that you're going to and how secure it is and all this other stuff. But when you go ask your parents and they say, okay, why should I let you go? You're not able to articulate any of that stuff. Do you think you're going to Dallas?
No, like, you know it's the answer, but you can't.
You should always be able to explain it, even if it's. The one thing I don't want you to do is to make things overly complicated. Like, you're thinking you have to explain it in a way other than what's in your brain. You don't. You're recording. All right. So the great thing about this method, ladies and gentlemen, is it's only 7 steps. This presentation in of itself is only like 12 slides, so it won't take long. But I really want to get into the poems that you have in front of you. All right. So you just take a few notes. I won't speed through it, but I'll give you a general overview of each step. All right. You don't have to write every word that you see, because again, we're going to go over it. Like with an actual poem for you guys to get a better understanding. All right. Any questions? Let's get into it. So what is TP-CASTT, or TP-CASTT? All right. It's an acronym of steps used to analyze poetry. All right. The great thing about this is that one of the primary advantages is not only do you get a thorough top to bottom analysis of any poem that you read, but more importantly, you can turn around and use those results and turn them into an essay, like directly. Okay. So as we go through this, one of the things you're going to hear me say is write in complete sentence. Okay, write in complete sentences. Any result that you write down, any analysis, any observation you make as it pertains to a poem that you read now or going forward, you should always write that down, especially if you're using this method, in complete sentences, because that allows you to transition more naturally and more efficiently in a more streamlined way into an essay, which you will be writing next week. All right, so be prepared for that. All right, you will be writing a poetic analysis essay next week. This week, it's about learning the process. It's about understanding the process. It's about the application of the process. And then next week, we'll get into the articulation of that analysis. All right, but again, it's 7 steps, nothing overly complicated. All right, let's get into it. So when we're working with this, and we're working with this particular method, here are the basic things you're going to be doing. And you've actually been doing these things in a number of levels, a number of ways, in all your classes over the course of your entire academic career. Observation, interpretation, inferencing, analyzation, and evaluation. You have done that with almost every assignment you've ever had, every class, or one you have used. Okay? So you're not doing anything different here that you haven't already done in previous places or stops. All right? You don't necessarily have to write this down, but if you want to, that's great. All right, 5 seconds and move forward. All right, move forward. Let's start with step 1. All right. Step 1, you will take a look at the title. Now, as we go through these slides, you will see stuff at the top of the slide underneath the title of it. That is the primary focus of each slide. All right. So your goal in step 1 is to make a prediction about the poem based on the title. This is nothing that you haven't done already. You've just done it with different texts, whether it's informational, literary nonfiction, or biographies, whatever. Anytime you open up a STAR exam or any test for that matter, first thing you look at is the title. And based on the title, you try to give yourself an idea of what that particular piece of writing is about. Poems are no different, okay? Still trying to figure out what it's going to be about based on the title. So questions that you should be asking yourself in the beginning, as you look at step 1, what predictions can I make about the poem? Standard data. What feelings can I connect to the poem's title? That's a little bit different than, let's say, informational text. All right? If you know that you're reading a piece of informational text, you're not necessarily worried about making any type of emotional connection to that text. However, with a poem, what feelings can I make based on the title? The poems are about what? Expression, about the expression, feeling, expressing emotion in a creative way. So what connection can I make in terms of my feelings? Now notice it says down here, write your response in a complete sentence. Again, this is going to translate directly to an essay. So you want to write complete sentences wherever possible, especially when using this method to analyze poetry. But if you do it correctly, and you take your time with it, most times it will be a direct translation into essay form. 5 seconds. All right, moving forward. Step 2 is paraphrasing. Okay? Step 2 is paraphrasing. Not to be confused with summarizing. Okay? Your goal in step 2 is to translate the poem line by line into your own words. Okay? Into your own words. Now, if you think about annotating, this is one of the things that you guys are told most when you're annotating. You write little summaries and stuff like that on the side of the paragraph. Sometimes you might change words around, whatever the case may be. But you are not necessarily summarizing in this instance. You're going line by line and turning it into your own language, whatever that language might be. All right? If you are a Rick and Morty fan and you want to use Resort, clearly you're not a Rick and Morty fan. What?
The movie?
Did you say Fist Bump the movie?
This time.
Oh, I know. She's not kidding.
What? No.
Oh my God.
Have you seen Rick and Morty?
Yes.
No, yeah.
I did not know either.
Brothers in the name.
No,
there's
ah!
there's
It's the title.
Dear kitty kitty. Dear kitty kitty kitty.
Hey, Chris Johnson.
Just.
Oh,
Little kitty,
yeah.
Just never mind.
Ah.
Just dear kitty. Come on. There you go. Grab the kitty. Oh, gotta be quicker than that. All right, but when we're paraphrasing, all right, when we're paraphrasing, you're taking the literary meaning and plot of the poem, okay? Understanding of the poem requires comprehension. Now, there are some poems that if you brought them out right now, the language would absolutely blow your mind, like what are they talking about? Other poems, you would get it, you wouldn't have to, okay? Not every poem is going to be in a language that you understand. So comprehension requires you to understand it, okay? So In order for you to know what's going on in the poem, what better way than to put it in language that you understand? All right. So when we're talking about paraphrasing, you take what's written, you try to understand what it's saying, and then you take that understanding and you put it in language that you understand. Whatever language that is, whatever words you want to use, you can use slang terms. I have seen students draw pictures, symbols to represent what the meaning was, what they thought the meaning was, okay? But at the end of the day, what I will tell you is as long as you understand it, that is all that matters. That makes sense? Don't you have to write it a certain way for me or anybody else to understand, especially when you're talking about paraphrasing, okay? But paraphrasing, line by line, into your own words, helps increase comprehension, all right? Any questions on paraphrasing? All right, step 3, connotation. Now, we have talked about this before. We talked about the differences between denotation and connotation, okay? In poetry, connotation indicates that you, the analyst, are examining any and all poetic devices. That could be imagery, figurative language, sound devices, diction, symbolism, things like that, okay? All of those things that we talked about last week in terms of being able to identify, that's why we talked about it. Because all those things have meaning, whether it's individually or collectively. Your job, your goal as the analyst, is to contemplate the poem for the meaning beyond the literal by considering the author's use or non-use of these various poetic devices. Because what happens is, when you link these things together, you get a clear picture of the overall meaning. Okay? So, figurative language plus symbolism, imagery plus diction, imagery plus figurative language plus point of view. How all these things come together to help you understand what the author, the poet, what their message is, what they're trying to say, what they want you to know. Okay? All right, 5 more seconds. All right, step 4. Step 4 is attitude, okay? When we talk about attitude in terms of poetic analysis, we're talking about your observation of both the speaker and the poet's attitude, okay? Remember we mentioned last week that unlike regular prose, poems don't have a narrator. They have a speaker, which may not always be the person that wrote the poem, okay? Narrator is the one telling the story in typical fiction, or even nonfiction, all right? In poem, you have somebody speaker. You have a speaker using a voice, all right? What you're trying to figure out is that speaker's attitude. The voice that they're using, how they're saying what they're saying, level of emotion, the heightened expression, the lack thereof. And you're also trying to figure out the poet's attitude, or starts with a T, the tone, right? These are all the things that in step 4 you are trying to determine, okay? And the reason for that, simply this. Having examined the poem's devices and clues closely, back in step 3, now explore the multiple attitudes that might be present in the poem. Here you would describe the tone of the author and or speaker. The main reason for this is because it helps you get a clearer picture of the mindset. When you know what I'm thinking, you can figure out why I'm thinking it. When you can figure out why I'm thinking it, then that gives you a better opportunity to figure out what it is I'm trying to say. That make sense? All right, we're gonna move forward. Step 5 is shifts. All right, now we're at the S. Your goal here is to identify and note the shifts in the speaker's attitudes, or emotions, okay? The reason for that is this. Most poems do not end where they start. Whatever emotion or attitude you identify in a line or two in the beginning or in the stanza, most times will not be the same emotion that you see in the last lines or the last stanza, okay? There is always at some point, not always, but most times there is a shift in how that poet feels, and they let you know that. Not always explicitly, most times implicitly. I mean, you've got to be paying attention to what's going on, okay? All right? But discovery of a poet's understanding of an experience is critical to understanding of the poem. Say it again. Discovery of a poet's understanding of an experience is critical to the understanding of the poem. So if you want to know what it is I'm really trying to say, you have to understand where that emotion comes from. You have to track and understand and pay attention to that emotional experience. Because when you do that, you can understand the meaning behind the poem. I'm not necessarily saying you have to empathize with that poet, that speaker, but knowing where knowing the roots of their experience will help you understand the meaning of their message. That makes sense. So when we talk about step 5, we want to trace. Okay, here's how you felt in the beginning. Here's how you felt in the end. Let's see how that journey occurred. All right. Five seconds. And we'll move forward. Now, the question you should ask yourself is, well, how do I do that, Mr. Johnson? How do I identify shifts in the host or the speaker's attitude and emotion? Well, here are some keys to finding and identifying those shifts, whether it's the use of key words, punctuation or lack thereof, stanzas and how they're divided, changes in line or stanza length, or both, okay? Irony. We know what rimbo irony is, right? In a nutshell, it's that misalignment between expectation and reality. What you think is going to happen versus what actually happens. What you think somebody's saying versus what they actually say, okay? The effect of structure on meaning, how a poem is structured, okay? How a poem is structured from top to bottom can affect the meaning. The changes in sound, whether it's rhyme, rhythm, things like that, and then change in diction, okay? I imagine at some point in the lives of everyone that's in this room, you have been called by your full government name. And you typically know what that means when your parents call you by your full government name. First, middle, last, second last, third last, junior, senior, the third, the second, the fourth. Lawrence Darnell Johnson, Jr. the fourth. What? That's not even your name. But when you hear that, you go from being baby or Pookie. Oh, I'm sorry, that's just me. I'm the one that has that baby name.
Yeah, I admit it. Yeah, like,
No, I don't. So how would I know what your parents call you at home?
I just thought you should go get home.
It's because you're saying?
Yes. I just don't ever call me.
Samantha. Samantha. She does this thing when she laughs. So again, these are some of the main keys to identifying shifts. Okay, these are some of the main keys to identifying shifts. All right, this is where right now, from step 3 on, this is where you're kind of doing the heavy lifting of your analysis. Okay, 5 seconds. All right, moving forward. Now, step 6, we're back at the title. Now, in your mind, you're thinking, you're asking yourself, why are we back at the title? We just did that in step 1. And you would be correct. However, we have done a whole bunch of other things since dealing with the title in step 1. And you must also consider how we dealt with the title in step 1. In step 1, it was just, what do I think the poem is about based on the title, right? But now your goal in step 6, revisiting the title, is to examine the title, but this time on a more interpretive level. Because now we have acquired a whole bunch of information from step 2 to step 5 that allows us to look at the title again, but in a different way, okay? So, when we're talking about questions we should be asking ourselves the second time around as it pertains to the title, why is the title whatever it is? Again, we didn't have that answer before. Before it was just, what do we think the poem is about? And now we have a better idea, especially going through steps 3 and 4. Now that we have a better idea of what the poem is about, we can revisit the title and say, why is it that? And more importantly, what does it mean? All right? So now we're before everything was surface. Now we're getting deeper. Now we're going underneath. We're going subcutaneous. For those of you that pay attention to science class.
No.
Subcutaneous.
What?
Subcutaneous. You know what it means? You know what it means? Subcutaneous. Underneath the skin.
The tissue? What's supposed to know that?
People that take biology.
Okay, well, nobody likes biology.
Yeah, nobody likes it.
It's true, nobody likes it.
Okay. Wow. First of all, you're being recorded. Yeah. You know what? Where are my keys at?
What's your last name? What's your last name?
Wow. Wow.
Who's the big sense?
What?
Who's the big sense?
Your classmates that aren't here. All of them. In all my classes. Yeah. I'm posting this to all of them, not just. Good thing I can edit. Man. Yeah, I'm gonna edit. All right. Yes, yes, I am. All right, let's talk about number 7. So we're good on the title, right? Again, at this point, second time around, step 6, you're trying to reinterpret on a deeper level that title. Now it should have more meaning by this point. Step 7 is a theme, okay? This one's a little more involved in previous steps, but it's highly important, okay? Step 7, you're trying to determine what the author is saying, okay? And what he wants, and what that author wants you to learn and feel after reading the poem. Now we know there is a difference, as we have discussed before, there's a difference between theme and subject, okay? Theme, not the same as subject. Subject is just what the topic, what's being talked about. Doesn't necessarily mean that's the message. Does that make sense? All right, so now we want to identify the theme, recognize those human experiences, motivations, and conditions that the poem is trying to suggest. This step within itself has a number of steps to it. It has a system of steps. First one is to summarize the plot. Now, again, we talked before, as we mentioned before, summarization is not the same as paraphrase. Whereas paraphrase, you go line by line and changing it into language that you can understand, your own words. Summarization is a little bit different. Now you're going and you're just getting those key points. You're putting them together and saying, this is basically what they were talking about. These 4 or 5 important things, okay? So once you summarize the plot, then you want to list the subjects of the poem. Moving from the literal, which is typically broad, to something a little more abstract, okay? So here, let's think about Romeo and Juliet, right? One of the subjects that are breached and talked about in Romeo and Juliet is love, right? love, romance, so on and so forth. However, that is not necessarily the theme. That's not one of the themes. Love in and of itself is not the theme. That's just a subject. What about love? Okay, what does Shakespeare say about love in Romeo and Juliet? That's where we get the theme from. Does that make sense? Then finally, we determine what the poet is saying about each subject. Notice again, write a complete sentence, making a statement and point about the subject or subjects. That statement is key, ladies and gentlemen. Again, it streamlines you and leads you more efficiently into an essay. We want to get away from the habit of writing in fragmented thoughts. Okay? Even though you live in a text culture, you cannot write academically that way. Does that make sense? All right. And that's not to say that what you're doing with your phones right now in this moment, it's not just you. But it's not to say that what you're doing with your phones in and of itself is a bad thing, as long as you understand the difference between what you're texting versus what you have to write academically. Make sense? All right. 5 seconds and we're moving on from theme. We actually got 2 slides left. One of them we're going to skip.
We have one. Yeah, that's what it's skipping.
Yeah, and a lot of this.
Oh, you're making me bad.
Yeah, why did you job so hard?
Good. So much work.
I need you to start taking your medicine. If you find yourself forgetting to take your medicine, I will set an alarm on my phone so you won't forget.
Why can't I bring my medicine?
Take it before you get it. All right. So we've already got poems we're going to look at, so we don't need to look at this one. Okay. But what I do want you to take a look at is the difference between the subject versus the theme. Okay.
What?
Talks about a child's first experience, loss of pet innocence. But the themes are vastly different. Okay. Any questions on that? Congratulations, you made it. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording. Oh, look, it's Sean Rowe. What are you doing, Sean Rowe? Yeah, you. What are you doing? Nothing. Nothing. What? No guys had any drinks today? Why are you doing that? Did someone break your heart?
Not necessarily.
Shh, it's here. Hey, what's up, man? It's all good. When you remember, it's their loss, not yours. It's their loss, not yours. No. It's not always about you. Yes.
What?
There's nothing to tell you. We were just having a random conversation. Oh, look, it's Joel. What's up, Joel?
My mom said life is like about talking.
I know, what's that video like?
Yeah, I was good. Hey, when did you leave?
We'll come back to you.
Should I bring my phone?
I just